So I'll frame the discussion, Vali, around the three key elements in the picture. First, we'll talk about Israel. Then we'll talk about what could happen inside Iran. And third, we'll talk about what are the options that the United States has and where it could go. So I could argue, Vali, that Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th is what set in motion the chain of events that led to Israel's unprecedented attack on Iran a few years ago. Do you agree or disagree with that?
October 7th is a starting point, and largely because the scale of the attack that Israel suffered and the challenge that it posed to Israel in terms of losing its deterrence in the first months of the war, its population feeling insecure, and then the kind of anger, shock, awe, etc., that Hamas's attack and what entailed included also had a psychological change in Israel itself. I think there was a determination that grew that that Israel has to do a lot more and take a lot more risk and be willing to essentially eliminate this problem once and for all. So I think that's pretty important. In fact, before October 7th, the wording among many experts was that Prime Minister Netanyahu talks a big game, but is pretty risk averse. And in fact, when the United States killed the Iranian General Soleimani, it really irked President Trump that Netanyahu was present in egging him on to do this and was involved. And the last minute, Israel did not participate in the actual operation. And so there's a psychological shift, if you will, there's a change of mindset in Israel. And that changed essentially the balance of how much Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis would restrain Israel's willingness to take risks and do things. So I think Israel's decision was that if Hamas could kill 1,200 Israelis, abduct 200 people, humiliate the intelligence services at the beginning, that this whole thing is a much larger order of threat and Israel has to do something. But in the first year of the war, Hamid, Israel was not succeeding. I mean, the word was that the axis of resistance had it on its back heel. Israel was not getting its hostages released. It was not completely demolishing Hamas. And it was under fire from Hezbollah, from Houthis, and from other militias in the region. It is really the pager coup when they carry out that audacious decimation of Hezbollah's leadership that really the tide begins to change in an essential way. And I think where we are, and we can dig further because the loss of Syria, killing of Nasrallah, etc., they're all part of this. But I think Israel basically sees the war on Iran not just about Iran's nuclear program. I think, yes, that's important. Everything you said is absolutely correct. But this is really an extension and continuation of the Gaza war, even though that war hasn't finished. In other words, the rules that Israel established that is going to finish off the axis of resistance once and for all. And the window of opportunity is there with Iran, with Trump. And that's why exactly Israel is not interested in a nuclear deal. It's not just because the nuclear deal is not 100% proof that Iran would not have weapons, but because the nuclear deal does not address the issue of Iran as a regional threat, aside from its nuclear program. And Israel wants to actually finish off Iran as an adversary. And so you have to see this war as a tail end of the Gaza war, not just because Iran is weaker and Hezbollah is not there, etc., but also because I think that what Israel decided that it was going to do with the regional threats, October 8th, 9th, 10th onwards, is basically being still implemented.
What is your assessment in terms of its degree of penetration of the IRGC and whether there are factions inside IRGC that could be part of this long game or strategy of attack? I
mean, you're right. I mean, first of all, we have to start by saying Mossad is really good at this. I mean, Americans may own the technology for the Air Force, et cetera, that Israel has, but actually in espionage, in this kind of particularly human level espionage, the Israelis are very, very good. Now, Israel has had a footprint in Iran. If we go back to before the first nuclear deal, when there was a massive cyber attack on Iran's nuclear program called Stuxnet. I mean, Israelis had somebody who took a USB into Iran's most secure nuclear facilities and loaded the worm onto the machines that caused crashes of cascades of centrifuges. I think Iran found out when Hezbollah was decimated, when Haniya was killed, that it has a huge security problem, that it has been infiltrated. But plugging that hole takes time. And in fact, that's part of the reason that Israel is in a hurry to basically finish what it wants to finish in Iran militarily, because that window could potentially close. So what they've invested massively, they want to leverage. And although I would say that the killing of the 5 or 6 commanders that happened a few weeks ago is not just an intelligence coup, it's that it was a misunderstanding or miscalculation by Iran, that they trusted that when Trump said that there would not be a military solution until the talks failed. So their expectation was that there would not be a military attack and they don't need to hide in bunkers until they met in Sunday in Qatar and heard from in Oman, and heard from Americans whether there was a way forward or not. So partly there was a surprise here that this attack came before the last round of the talks, and it caught them off guard. But I have to say, since then, and this is important to note, the way in which IRGC has reacted is also surprised Israel. Because if in any military, if you decimated the top 5 commanders that run the 5 main branches of a military organization, you don't expect them to be able to launch a coherent military response the next day. So the IRGC has not collapsed the way Hezbollah has. It's still fighting the war. And so in that sense, I think there are limits to what the intelligence has achieved so far.
Israel has been pursuing a balancing act by saying that it is going after Iran's leadership, but is not at war with the people of Iran. And is very careful to continue to make that distinction, including the label that it's using for this attack, which is Rising Lion. How far do you think that balancing act can go, given the increasingly high level of strikes into Tehran, which is inevitably going to hit the Iranian population? It's actually broader than Tehran. It's as you know, it's across the entire country. And at what point is there a risk that they're running that at some point people would say this is an attack against the integrity of the country, and as much as they may disagree or have animosity towards the regime, protecting the sovereignty of the country comes first, and it actually results in the population coming together behind the regime. How is it thinking about that balance?
I mean, I think the Israelis are far too sophisticated and far too knowledgeable to buy into the regime change rhetoric that they're putting out. I think this is a lot of it is very, very sophisticated war propaganda. It's often understood. We are with the people. We are after the regime. We're going to help liberate you. You should rise up, etc. If it happens, it's great. But I don't think the Israeli war cabinet was putting any stock on a popular uprising in Iran. I think the way this campaign is being waged, and again, as you said, it has been thought of for a long time, is actually to degrade the Iranian state. So the attack very early on came against nuclear sites and against military leadership, which was supposed to be able to conduct the war. And then it began to go after the various organs and institutions of the state, from the radio, television, to refineries, electrical facilities, and even very early on, it did hit civilian targets, because even some of the generals who were assassinated were killed in their homes, and they lived in high rises, and these were hit. And then I think they've proceeded, including with this threatening Tehran, ordering evacuation, which was then reiterated by President Trump, although Tehran does not have military targets inside of it. So it's no logic to say, get out because we need to hit. It's largely to create enough mayhem, enough anxiety that actually would make Iran, and particularly Tehran, ungovernable, would overwhelm the institutions of the state. And it's basically they're looking not for regime change, they're looking for regime collapse.
To really finish off Iran's nuclear capability requires fundamentally the US to get directly involved, which is essentially a declaration of war between the United States and Iran. Now, that goes counter to everything Trump and the MAGA movement believes in, which is not to get the US involved in a distant war. So when Trump threatens Iran with that, and given that this is so counter to everything that he stood for and the MAGA movement stood for, and we know that he really does care about what the MAGA movement thinks about all this, how do you think, first of all, how realistic a threat is that? And how do you think the people in Iran are reacting to those kinds of threats?
I think it's a very good point. I think before the attacks happened, there was more of a sense that that the MAGA mentality was dominating. That Trump didn't want war. Yes, he would say if diplomacy fails, I would have to do it, but that he wasn't going to do it. And there was also reading of the tea leaves, like he let go of his national security advisor, and then the new Secretary of State / National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio, fired a number of neocon lower level people. There were very loud voices in the MAGA movement: Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, etc., which are all of whom are very anti-war. And then there was the example of Yemen, that he allowed the war start, and then he pulled the plug on it when it wasn't getting the results that he wanted. But then the question is, how does Iran interpret the Israeli attack? So one theory is to say Trump can say anything he wants, but the decisions are made in Jerusalem, not in Washington. That he basically, Bibi, and in fact, his foreign minister, I was on a program, he was talking, he said, well, we decided the talks have failed. I thought that was a really interesting comment. In other words, they're not even at the table, but he basically said, we made the decision that these talks are not going anywhere and we're going to pull the plug. So if that's the case, then the Iranians may conclude that everything we say about MAGA, Trump, etc., is immaterial. This decision is driven by Bibi, and Bibi can control Trump. The second argument is that Trump actually never meant to negotiate with Iran, that this was all a ruse, and all along he had a deal that this would happen. And now they can look back and say that's true. There were 5 rounds of talks. The first 2, the U.S. was not even ready to talk. It didn't have the personnel. Witkoff just showed up. When the Iranians gave him a proposal in the first meeting, he said, I'm not ready for a proposal. This is just a get to know you meeting. And then, he didn't want to do sustained talking. He wanted to come, meet for half a day, leave, and then leave it to the Omanis to do things. And then they got stuck on basically this enrichment issue, which was only one element in what a deal ought to be. They never actually negotiated about substance. And even before they got there, then it pulled the plug. So you could say that he never even meant to negotiate. And the third argument is that he just decided to try to use an Israeli strike to soften Iran up. And he might have lost control now. That he thought that they would bomb a few places, they would kill a few people, and then the Iranians would come on their knees and sign whatever he dictates. So I think it's very difficult to read what the true Trump is, because having started this is extremely difficult. Now, if Trump really, the key question, and I think where Iran is, Iran's only leverage is to force Trump to face war, because otherwise Trump expects surrender from Iranians. And so the only way that they can deal with them is to say that if you think you're crazy, we're crazier than you. We're willing to risk an all-out war. Are you ready to invade with tens of thousands of troops and get bogged down in the Middle East? If you're not, then as Iran's foreign minister has said, you have to get Israel to stop and then negotiate properly about a nuclear deal. So there is already, if you want, pre-negotiation through intermediaries and through the press that's going back and forth. I mean, neither Iran nor America has closed the door to negotiations. But the key issue is right. I mean, if there is a deal, Trump cannot bomb Fardo. He has to stop there. And then he has to find a way to control Bibi. And I find what Bibi said extremely interesting, because it's almost like he's preparing a way to claim victory short of destruction of Fardo, to say that, we've achieved a lot, because it's really up to him to say Iran is now, he keeps saying Iran is 6 months from a bomb. He can now say they're 2 years from a bomb. I mean, he can change the narrative. If Trump is not, goes and bombs Fardo, it is still possible that he thinks that Iranians will be forced to negotiate after Fardo is gone. But then the scenarios could be very, very complicated. The Iranians may at that point retaliate, either against the United States directly, bases around the region, go after the world oil markets, put mines into the Straits of Hormuz, basically try to force the United States hand on war, or that they basically would say, you know what, we're going to come out of NPT, we're going to rebuild something like Fardo, we're going to kick out all the IAEA inspectors, and we're going to rebuild the program and accelerate directly to build a weapon. And here's something which is interesting, because everybody's been talking about enrichment. But according to Bibi Netanyahu, and I take him at his word, Iran has enough enriched material for 9 bombs. Now, I don't know whether that's 60% or 90%. In other words, he says they can basically build a bomb. So Iran can build 9 bombs as we're speaking without having Fardo and Natanz, if you take Netanyahu at his word. He says we haven't bombed those enriched uranium because it may cause radioactive dissemination, but it's also possible they don't know where those are. And so then if Iran goes dark and you don't have a deal with it, then the US is going to be put in a position again that the only way to ensure that Iran is not building a bomb is actually to invade Iran and try to do what they tried to do in Iraq. So bombing Fardo, yes, there's a scenario in which you bomb Fardo, you kill the supreme leader, the whole thing collapses, and you're done with it. But if you bomb and the regime survives, then Trump will have a more difficult set of options before him. And now pulling a deal out of the hat without Fardo being bombed, it requires really to see how good a deal maker is. I mean, this really requires him to manage the Iranians in a way that bring him a table and manage Israelis as well. And it's not easily done. I think if he really allowed this attack to happen as just to get a leverage against the Iranians, he may have miscalculated, because the situation has become more complicated for him.